take it away, Gabrielle.
All right, let me.
We don't need a quorum, right? So.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. So let's see where we are in the world. So we do have the one consent agenda item, and you got the new link in the PDF. That was for the West Park Village VFW architecturals, which we reviewed at workshop last night.
Architectural review. Okay.
Exactly. That's all that is. Yeah, not that's all that is, but that was the architectural review. At the workshop, the applicant had raised the fact that she didn't feel that they complied with the full element for entryways and windows because their front entrance actually popped out of the front instead of being a recessed entry like the element requires. And that's intended to create, if you pictured like a streetscape like North Market Street, right, to create that variability in the street wall. So a little different in this context, but they actually did revise their elevations to recess the entryway by 2 feet. So now it's recessed 2 feet and then into a vestibule. So they revised it to comply with the elevation, the standard. It doesn't probably make a huge dramatic difference in the appearance of the building, but that did get revised. So because of that, we put it on the consent agenda, and we don't have any other comments or questions on our end.
So why is the Wren Quarter architectural review not on the consent agenda?
So they have a little bit of cleanup to do on their elevations themselves. They have some lettering and numbering duplication. So because we had that one condition that we wanted them to tweak those, you guys have to take a vote on it.
Gotcha. Okay. Ron, do you have any questions?
No questions for me. Thank you.
All right.
How am I doing with my practice?
That was very good. Nicely done. The next we have four continuances, but two.
Yeah. Unfortunately, so the Madison on North Market project, unfortunately, they have a large water and sewer easement that goes through their property. It is their property, but there is a large easement, and maybe it's just sewer, that is actually a Fort Detrick facility. There's a line coming through there that belongs to Fort Detrick. As they continued to design their project, the Fort actually approached them and said, no way can you do anything within this easement area that might adversely impact our sewer line, even though it belongs to the property. So it, usually an easement is granting you rights, but doesn't.
Yeah.
I haven't seen personally the easement, but usually an easement, if you're smart, you don't grant an easement that would take away a lot of your own rights, especially to such a large swath of land. But apparently this easement, the Fort feels gives them very much control over that area, and they don't want anything potentially impacting that. The applicant was proposing to cross that easement area. So the applicant has chosen to redesign a little bit instead of taking on the legal question of whether they have the right to use the easement. I think that that litigation or conversation would be much more expensive and much more protracted than just kind of rerouting their sewer to go. Actually, now it's going to head southbound towards the Coke plant. They might have to install a like some sort of small pump because it won't have gravity flow. So they'll have to install a pump on the site, pump that south towards the Coke property, at which point it would go into some sort of transition main and then get into our city's gravity sewer. So there would be some public or some private infrastructure involved. With that being said, unfortunately, what that had the adverse impact of doing is messing up some of the assumptions that their APFO certificate for sewer was based on.
Oh, okay.
Right, because you figure, okay, this is how much sewer we're producing, this is the directions it's going, and this is the infrastructure that's being impacted. Now it's going another way into another connection. So the applicant has, they've been very proactive in getting us new data to crunch those numbers with the new impacted infrastructure. They've submitted those to our engineering department, and the engineering department is reviewing those to reissue a certificate, basically, to evaluate that and reissue the certificate. So in addition to the certificate, the other thing and why we want to continue it and why it wouldn't be good just to condition the plan on it is we want to make sure that any of those adjustments to the sewer infrastructure doesn't mess with things on the site, right? We don't like to, get the plan approved and then see, oh, now you have to move this and it changes all this landscaping and everything kind of dominoes sometimes. So best to understand exactly any impacts as limited as they might be, how, landscaping, parking, if you're shifting, things left or right. So I think the applicant, I think they are very excited about their project. I think they intend on attending on Monday night just to be there in case there are any questions. But they are moving forward, and they're doing everything they need to on their end to get everything together to make that adjustment. Unfortunately, we got the information from the fort very, very last minute after we had already started to prepare our staff report, and then this kind of came up. So
And
that's where that is.
Does the issue with the fort's easement affect the forest conservation plan at all?
It should not.
Okay. Ron, any questions?
No, I'm just surprised that the Dietrich would be this far north. Is that, am I missing something?
I don't know exactly where, and we can ask, and
we're talking about the Madison, because for some reason I got kicked out of my PDF.
Isn't the water treatment plant that's a little bit further up on North Market, isn't that the Fort Dietrich water treatment plant?
Where it's heading? That is a good question.
I think it is.
On North Market, but aren't we talking about Madison, which is on the south side of town?
No. This is the Madison on Market that's up near where Schifferstadt comes into North Market.
Oh, the Madison. Okay, I'm thinking Madison Street over here.
Yeah.
Got it. I understand now. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. No, I have no questions. Thanks.
That's that one. The other continuance, which was continued once already, is for the U-Haul site plan and forest plan. As you recall, at our workshop, we had a good, robust discussion about their forest conservation, their landscaping, the modifications they were requesting. They revised, they got continued because they wanted to spend some time to tweak that. So we continued that last month to this month. They submitted plans, reworking their landscaping. Unfortunately, then found out too that Washington Gas is asking to relocate an easement onto their site. I believe there's the road work that's going to be done in Monocacy. That's part of our CIP, but then there's also some easement that Washington Gas now needs to relocate some utilities. And that unfortunately was looking like it was going to impact some of their new landscaping that they were proposing as part of their modification and compensating design features. So we advised them that until that, exactly where that utility easement needs to be and what they can do within it, because the utility companies also poo-poo landscaping a lot of the time. We wanted to have them figure that conversation out with Washington Gas, revise the plan, reflect accurately what they are going to be able to provide in terms of compensating landscaping for other areas where they're still requesting a modification, that sort of thing. So hopefully the 30 days, I believe I was CC'd on an email yesterday or the day before that they were, I think the applicant had a firm grasp on where that utility easement was going to be now. So hopefully with that solidified, they can pivot and anything else that needs to be adjusted.
All right.
So that is that one.
Do you have any questions, Ron?
No, thank you.
All right. So I already asked you about Wren Quarter architectural review. Is there anything else you need to say about that?
Nope. The only conditions were to tweak some duplication of lettering and numbering on the elevations.
Okay. Then we have the Wren Quarter continuance for the site plan.
Yeah, so this has not been presented to you at a workshop. This is kind of a miscellaneous item, a request for an extension of their final site plans for their multifamily components that have been approved. Under the LMC, staff is able to grant one 6-month extension, I believe it is. And then anything beyond that has to go to the Planning Commission. Unfortunately, the section in 309 doesn't really give a lot of guidance as to what you should be considering. Obviously, the intent is to make sure projects are still doing their due diligence in moving forward, that we don't have something that's just continued for 40 years. And by continuing it for that long, you're not giving the opportunity to apply the current standards as time goes on, right? You don't want to continue something forever and then change your regulations and not have an opportunity to consider the project. The important thing with continuances that we should also consider is the validity periods of the adequate public facilities certificates. They really are one and the same as the site plan. A site plan without a certificate is no good, and a certificate without a site plan is no good. They really have to be attached to each other. The Wren Quarter APFO testing was done with the master plan, and it was for the longest period of time under the APFO that you can test for, and that's based on the unit mix and the amount of non-residential, and that's the 15 years. So they have quite a while still to go on their approvals before we would get into a place where the APFO certificates would start to be a concern. So they are requesting a 3-year extension of those final site plans. They've provided in their justification letter some information about the market and financial considerations, which aren't generally a concern for the Planning Commission when you're looking at a site plan. It's not a reason to be, I'm not going to put in landscaping because it costs too much. But
Right.
in terms of an extension, it is a factor in how developments happen. So I think that those are fair considerations that they've raised.
Ron, do you have any questions?
One question. Does
Mhm.
this, and I'm trying to, I don't know why I keep on getting kicked out with the floor plans, but is this going to affect that, you know me, that that intersection of Monocacy and Hughes, is it Hughes Board?
The timing of improvements.
Yes.
So, and Cherian, you can chime in if I start to talk crazy. So that's tied to units issuance, right? Permits. Now, I would say no, it shouldn't have. Units are units. If they're moving forward with the townhouse, the single family is whatever. Now, with that being said, obviously a multifamily building is going to be 60 units real fast, 80 units real fast. So it's going to jump the numbers. And that's a consideration when and I think Pam included some in your staff report about the number of units that can be issued before they have to do certain non-residential, right? So if they had built those multifamily buildings initially as their first development, right, 100 units or whatever it is, would have come online very fast. And those would have ticked against both the non-residential land use mix as well as any APFO conditions that are tied to number of units. Now, with that being said, if the issue is the multifamily just is slow, the market's stagnant for it, lending, whatever, and they're still moving forward with all of their other units, each unit they bring on single family town is going to still be counting towards your improvement trigger. Does that help?
It makes sense. I don't know if we're just delaying the improvement because of this one that's being delayed, or
you're not going to delay it any. So the improvements commensurate with the number of permits being issued.
Right.
If they were to build those units in multifamily, or if they were to build them in single family and townhouses, it's all going to get triggered at the same time. It's going to have the same impact on that trigger. And no units. So if they don't pull single family and town units and they want this extension of the final site plan, if the overall development slows down, yes, the timing of the signal, the improvements tied to the units would be slowed down ultimately. But I think that's assuming that they aren't going to move forward with the single family in towns either.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So,
yeah. I'll have to think about this.
Yeah.
So am I correct in understanding that basically if they stick with the existing schedule for the multifamily units, then that means they will have built too many units too soon and will have to switch over to building some non-residential before they can finish the single and towns? Is that what their argument is?
That's not their argument for the extension.
Okay.
That could be a result.
Okay.
That could be an outcome that we'll crunch the numbers a little bit before Monday. If they can only build so many units before either the improvement comes due or they have to start building non-residential, two separate concepts, but those things are unit dependent. So if they were to build all their multifamily, that's going to speed up the pace at which then you hit those points.
Right.
It's a good question.
So if I'm understanding this right, if it's delayed, then potentially those triggers aren't going to be met. Whatever.
Right, but it would have to be, you would have to also presume that they stop building single families in towns as well.
Right. So maybe by Monday, can we know what the trigger is for that to be fixed?
Hi, this is Chirian. Yeah, so as I think Gabrielle kind of covered it, sorry, I'm not on the camera. I'm just struggling through getting well after being sick, probably still sick. So there is the mitigation agreement kind of puts a very hard numbers as far as building permits go when that improvement kicks in. The multifamily buildings in totality would have had, I think it's like 275 units. So if that's what it was the first one that went in, they probably would have hit that 800 or so by now. But since they didn't hit that, they probably got a lot of play before they actually hit that number. So I think that's really where they know that even if the multifamily building is not built with the phase 3 of Wren, which is on the south side of Monocacy, going forward now, they're pretty close to hitting that 800 magic number fairly quickly. And I think even the Wren 3 may have a condition which requires them to start the intersection improvement sooner rather than later. So all of these are tied to, I haven't looked at the mitigation agreement recently, but it's an occupancy permit. So building it permit issued and go through the construction of 18 months or 24 months before somebody moves in. That's really where they look at the number of units. So that when would they hit that magic number? I'm not quite sure. But I believe there was a much more stringent probably requirement with Wren 3 starting, because 7 years back the phasing was totally different. They said the apartments go first and the Wren north of Monroe will get done first, and they may not move into that southwest corner of Monroe and Monocacy until everything else is done. But they're not following that. They're starting with that Wren phase 3. So there is not as much clarity at this point. The only thing I can say is that because the multifamilies were not built, they probably have a little bit of play. It's a critical path is for what's required of that phase 3 of Wren. So that's a timing issue that may not be quite there today, but one of the other things that the applicant had asked, and actually the staff has requested of the applicant, is to potentially change the design for Monocacy and Monroe from a signal to a roundabout. The applicant has been open to that proposal. It's something that there is concurrence between parties. We may look at a roundabout instead of a signal at that location. So that's a design change that might throw some delay. I'm not sure. I mean, it's something we kind of sort of still on our plate and trying to get to. It's totally on my plate to kind of get it processed at this point.
Which is interesting because in today's Frederick News Post, there was that article about Mater and Fairview and
13.
And I was thinking of that in these terms too. So apparently there's a 800 number that, how close are we to that 800 number? And this is when it comes to the 800 number, we're talking about southwest of this intersection, correct? Is that the trigger? 800?
Yeah, I have to look at it before, maybe for Monday, we have some better information for you.
Okay, that's all I ask. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
So is there city policy that has a preference over higher density development versus the lower density development that would affect the decision here? Is it, and it feels like the city really needs more multifamily housing. So, I mean, if we deny the extension, does that mean they have to move forward and build the multifamily housing sooner? And is that something that is a reasonable thing to be making a decision on? Or
So
influencing the decision?
If the extension, so the master plan is the binding document, right? They've
Right.
gotten approval for all of these different types of unit, and their APFO tests assume different unit mixes and trip generations and students and all these things. So that really is the end product.
Right.
I think that the impact of denying the site plan extension would be if they can't feasibly build it, right? If if they can't get lending, if it can't actually happen, then the site plan, it would expire.
And
They
then
would be forced to do a new site plan. Kind of like at the beginning, one of the reasons you have periods of validity on plans is you don't want someone to come in, I got the site plan approved in 1985 and now here I am in 2023 and I'm going to build this and it's got no landscaping and right, we get better over time. Our regulations get better, hopefully. The thing with the master plan too is that any changes that we would make to the code in the intervening time would have a more limited impact than outside of a master plan community, because the master plan is really set forth most of the regulations that are going to apply as they build out. So there's less of a chance that you would change something and then want to, be like, oh, I'm going to apply this law instead. So it's really more about the mechanics of the site plan and keeping it alive or not.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, just one more thing then. Because then I'm thinking of, okay, so this master plan, I don't know when this master plan was approved. It was probably at least 5 years ago.
Yeah, it was 2015. I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
But then again, we've approved other projects in the area.
Correct.
And how do they not impact these decisions? I mean, it shouldn't just be on Wren Quarter, even though that was one of the stipulations in the Wren Quarter plan. But again, the thing I have about not looking at these things in a vacuum, we've had substantial approvals that we've made in this area. Some of the dirt is flying already in one of them near the airport on Airport Drive. And at what point do the other projects impact those?
So generally speaking, when something gets its approval, like under APFO, it becomes background approval for everything that comes after it, right? For school testing, when we report to Frederick County Public Schools that we've approved, when we have a new test request, it's including everything that's gotten a certificate of adequacy, everything that's been tested up until that point. So it is cumulative in that sense, that you're building upon each thing that has come before and has been tested, regardless of whether it's actually built out or not. It becomes that background. From that perspective, right? If you assume Project A was going to generate 500 children, and then Project B comes in, and you use A as background, and then A falls apart. Whatever happens to it, it absolutely falls apart. In that sense, you would be in a better case scenario, right? You would have overestimated the impact, because when I judged Project B, I thought these 500 kids were coming out of Project A, and poof, they disappeared. And I think that's part of when we look at roads, right, that's part of the important thought process of these mitigation agreements. When we get into phasing, when the mayor and board has that authority to allow things to start coming online, you want to make sure that as you let stuff come online, you're also covering for its impacts in a in kind of a progressive way. Now, that doesn't mean at day one you need all of the improvements for the 1,200 homes, because the 1,200 homes are going to take 5 years, 10 years. Here we are almost 10 years from, Wren's approvals, right? So they're coming on in a graduated way, so that if Wren poof disappears, the 285 homes that have been built, hopefully whatever improvements were triggered as part of that are sufficient enough to support that 285, knowing that the rest of it's never going to happen. And it doesn't matter if they did those improvements or not, because it's not happening. And some other guy will end up on the hook for that. So in that same sense, you've overestimated if a project falls apart, if you've done a sound job of phasing those improvements in a way that reflects the capacity coming online at that time. If you say, okay, by 100 units, this stop sign is going to need to be installed, because that 100 units is going to create enough traffic. But so you get those 100 units, you've gotten your improvement. The next improvement might not be needed until 300 units. The traffic out of 300 units starts to produce. So then in that case, we go, okay, well, we'll let you get to 300, up to there, but by then we need this to happen. So if things fall apart anywhere along the road or the process,
Literally.
you should have accounted for those impacts for what is there, and nobody should be left completely high and dry. And then so the other projects that come in, the Oxford that comes in after Wren, is accounting for the ultimate impact of that. And if that ultimate impact doesn't happen, but you've done a good job phasing your infrastructure as the pieces come in, then in theory it should all work. Does that sound accurate, Tyrion? I mean,
yeah, all the thing I would add is there is always a nexus piece. So, I think the code talks about, I don't know exactly the terminology, but I think partial impact or a substantial impact or something like that. So if a project have, I think, over 50 or more impact on a particular improvement, then it becomes a requirement on them, with probably say, for example, Wren probably had the maximum impact at the particular intersection, versus Oxford probably having a 10% impact. So, someone having a 10% impact, there's no nexus for the code to say, oh, you need to go fix the whole intersection. Whereas, so usually that bigger impact project would be looked to make the improvement. The other, in a way, and collect money from others. So once an improvement is identified, it's typical for others to pay into that, who may have a 5% and somewhere between 5 and 10 or 15% impact. The one way to do it. The other way to do is for the city, the financing is not an issue. Go and do the improvement and collect money from these parties and say, but even there, it's really tight. Then we need a separate mechanism to collect these fees, because it's a capital improvement projects is a done deal and we can collect money on it. But also the capital improvement projects help trigger some of